Welcome to this State of the Arts conversation, a virtual edition today. Our topic is the together/apart, exploring isolation and solitude during a time of COVID. My name is Jerome Weeks. I'm the senior arts reporter for KERA's Art and Seek. And I just want to remind viewers on YouTube that anytime during this conversation, if you wish to make a comment or ask a question, do so in the chat section directly below the video, and we'll try to get to them. I'd like to introduce our three panelists today. They are Joy Bollinger, choreographer and artistic director of Bruce Wood Dance. Welcome, Joy.
Hi, thank you.
Ruben Carrazana, theater artist and one of the creators of the stage piece, The Cube. Welcome, Ruben.
Thanks for having me.
And Shelby David Meier, visual artist, whose work is currently on display at the Nasher Sculpture Center. Welcome, Shelby.
Just went down a few weeks ago, but yes.
Thank you. This is the first of three State of the Arts presentations this spring that we're going to do, all on questions concerning COVID, aspects of COVID's effect on the arts and their artworks. And I wanted to talk a little bit before we get to our panelists about if you research that, if you research the effect of COVID on the arts, what you'll often find is hundreds and hundreds of stories online that detail the data that talk about how many museums have closed, how many people have been put out of work because Broadway shut down, that kind of thing. Occasionally, these articles will include a single artist's perspective. They'll talk about how they have lost income or how they're no longer able to do what they truly love. But when you look back at major social, cultural, economic upheavals, the Great Depression, Civil Rights Movement in the 50s and 60s, you generally don't think in terms of data. You think of the tremendous outpouring, the influence they've had on music, movies, novels, magazines, just all of the art that was created in response to that. So our conversation today is about that. And it's going to come down to a big two-part question. The second part, which we'll spend some time on, is going to be about how these artists have transmuted this experience into their art, how it has affected them. But the first part of this two-part question is simply, what's been your personal experience? Perhaps you know someone who's died of COVID. Perhaps you know someone who's come down with it. Perhaps you had huge career moves planned and it all got shelved. So what have you experienced in terms of isolation, loss, solitude, all of that during COVID? And I thought I'd start alphabetically. Joy?
Yeah, for me personally, it was the loss of doing my job as it had been before. That was the first thing that was kind of ripped and quickly taken away. The loss of ability to work with dancers in a studio, the inability to join together movement in the same place, in the same space. That was the biggest impact. I had friends and family members that were affected by COVID. I did not lose anyone close to me, but as we'll talk about later, some of the stories that surrounded me during that time of experiences other people had were deeply impactful and really let me understand kind of the serious journey that a lot of people experienced battling the pandemic. I have two small children, so I do have to say isolation for me wasn't as much about alone time as just being separated from my work environment and my freedom to have that creativity in the space with dancers and that contact and that relationship with proximity to another person. I did have little bodies to hug and take care of all day, and that was probably a tremendous help to me, even though I didn't realize it at the time. But that was the most foreign part of the experience, is having to stay away from that which I spend every day doing and pouring into, and just my mode of working completely gone and changed.
So interacting with dancers as a choreographer and artistic director, that is your clay, your paint, your canvas, that's everything.
Right. And my favorite part of my job is being in the studio with the dancers when we're working on something, and coaching and trying things and having them relate to each other, and contact with another human being, imagine. And it was, all of these things were the biggest no-nos of all time now. Not a horrible idea, can't do it, can't even think about doing it. When will we do it again? We don't know. And just kind of little anxiety that comes with that, and the uncertainty that you just had to sit in for such a long time.
Ruben, as a performing artist, your experience must have been similar, but how was it done as a personal affair?
Yeah, so I'm a freelance theater artist here in town, and so I don't really have a day job, and I live alone, and I'm also not a very social being to begin with, and so in some ways you would think that being locked up in my apartment would be nice, since I don't generally like being around large groups of people, but theater was my only outlet that I had. And so to suddenly lose all of that, in addition to the loss of income, was also, it's true, I think, for everyone, but it was hard, kind of like mentally and emotionally. I went back home to Miami to be with my family, my parents and my sister and my nephews, for what I thought was going to be 2 weeks, until all of this kind of like blew over. I ended up staying there for 6 months. And then, I just kept waiting for things to get back to normal in Dallas. And then I realized it's not going to happen. So I'm going to need to figure something out. And so I came back here, tried to find ways to keep my mind engaged, started learning to play the piano. And then eventually started, groups started kind of like innovating, and I started finding ways to do something that was not exactly like what I was used to before the pandemic, but that came close enough, and that was exciting and challenging. Yeah, for those it's been hard not being able to interact with other people, and similar to what Joy was saying, being in a space with other human beings, not just the people on stage, but the audience. That's the only thing I had. Like, every friend that I've ever had has been through the theater. And so losing that, it was really tough.
As Shelby, as the visual artist here, you're often seen as pretty much a solo affair.
Yeah.
So was this a welcome solitude, a welcome isolation? Nothing changed, or did it in fact disrupt things?
I had messed around. No, I definitely think it did disrupt things a little bit. I think it just kind of the mindset of everything kind of shifted, when all of a sudden you have to kind of question everywhere you're going, and kind of just think about your own safety every day. It's a little disconcerting, when that mindset kind of happens. So I think for me, it felt like there were a lot of kind of distractions. Maybe like it seems like the opposite, where like I was able to go throughout my day and just kind of maybe look for an escape. That was kind of like the day-to-day thing, but kind of when you're back home, it's kind of you have to find a different way to kind of change your mindset, I think. So a lot of my working shifted. Also, my day job, or not day job, but another job I have, is I'm also an art handler. So a lot of my income kind of went away when museums shut down and there weren't any shows and people weren't inviting people to their homes and saw artwork like that. So that also kind of, a lot of my day-to-day routines kind of also went away with that too. So it felt like one of those, like, this might be a great opportunity, and then when I really sat with it, everything kind of froze up. So I think it's more like a mental kind of freeze or something for me.
As a visual artist in your art practice, do you interact with others, or is it really entirely a solo affair?
I mean, right now for me, so I share a studio, and so when all that happened, studio sharing didn't really happen as much. There's someone there full time where I studio, so I had my partner that I live with. She's a healthcare worker, so at the beginning of the whole pandemic, a lot of us kind of like, well, I don't know what I'm coming in contact with. I'll stay home. And so that's kind of what led me to these envelope drawings. There are a few projects that I always work at home and stuff, and I try to work solo most of the time in the first place. But not having a studio that I like to kind of migrate to, or kind of have a separation between live and work, kind of shook me up for a bit, for sure. Staying at home, there's a lot of distractions and a lot of stuff like that. So that's the main reason I like to have someplace else to work.
Ruben, to return to you and your successful attempt to get something like theater going, if you could talk to us about what led to the Cube and to the creation of this unusual work of art, and to help the viewers understand, we're going to run this short video that was created by Karen Carrion of KERA.
Friends, health, community, live theatrical performance, real human connection. Remember that? I've heard it's quite nice. I wouldn't know. I'm just a big glowing cube, but you are made of flesh and of bone, blood and muscle. Me, big glowing cube, us, here, now. What did you expect would happen? Did you come to be entertained? Were you expecting music and dance? I hope I have not disappointed. Why? Why did you come to me? How does it feel to be alone? I wouldn't know. Big glowing cubes cannot feel anything.
So Ruben, a number of performing arts groups like the Dallas Symphony went into live performance, returned to live performance with socially distanced and extremely reduced audiences. You took that to an extreme, just 3 people in a plastic box on stage for each performance. How did you get to that?
So, you know, at the beginning of the pandemic, theaters and theater artists, most of them turned to like virtual offerings, doing things over Zoom. And early on, I did one of those and realized that, you know, my strengths, what make me a good performer, didn't necessarily translate to, you know, a computer screen. And so I said I wasn't going to do another one of those because I just felt like I wasn't doing good work and I couldn't imagine that the audience was enjoying what I was, you know, producing. So my good friend, Jeffrey Moffat, who has a background in theater, but has recently been working a lot with art installations and projections, reached out to me and suggested that we create some kind of experience that could get people out of their homes. We create a structure with projection screens for walls that audiences could walk into, and they would be immersed in video and images. And so we brainstormed for a bit, and then I went off for a couple of weeks and wrote the script. And really what I wanted to do is, I knew that if we were going to do something live, it couldn't be something that asked the audience. It had to be a piece that was aware of the historical and social context in which we are currently living, right? So it couldn't be enough to, like, I don't know, do Romeo and Juliet, but the actors just happen to be wearing masks. You know, it's asking the audience to suspend their disbelief a little bit too much. It's asking them to detach from reality to an extent that I, as a performer, as a creator, don't feel comfortable asking the audience to do. And so I knew that the piece needed to be not necessarily about COVID, but needed to be aware of COVID. And it's a piece that I would not have created were it not for the pandemic. And so we were trying to kind of like straddle that line between, you know, the virtual and the live, safe while also having live performers. And so that's where the Cube came from.
When I spoke to the composer, musician that you worked with, Nigel Newton, about collaborating on this work, and it was done almost entirely, you guys collaborated almost entirely through texts and Zoom meetings, that kind of thing. You only met in person just a few days before you opened. But he said that the two key words that you gave him that he remembered for the music were loneliness and joy.
Yeah, I think loneliness is what I felt the most, over the past couple of months. I'm a pretty lonely person to begin with. I like loneliness, but I like being able to choose when I'm lonely, and this was kind of like loneliness that was forced upon me, and that made it harder. And so when I reached out to Nigel, our composer, and to Emily Burnett, our choreographer and dancer, I said that the show should probably explore that sensation of loneliness, but we also wanted to look at the light at the end of the tunnel, and we wanted it to be a piece that was hopeful. And so I think that's where joy came from, is we wanted the piece to end on kind of a high note. We didn't want it to be, a total bummer from beginning to end.
I was surprised when you told me that having built this plastic cube, that the whole idea of the kind of hospital isolation chamber had never really entered your head.
Yeah, that was something that you said when you stopped by to interview us. We wanted the audience to feel isolated, as they have been for the past couple of months. We wanted to kind of like replicate that. And there's a moment in the show where they're kind of like, the show breaks down and the projectors go out, the lights go out, the audience is plunged into darkness, the sound cuts out, and we forced the audience to sit that for like a while. And I remember you particularly thought it was maybe too long. It was like 3 minutes of silence and darkness.
Because I thought maybe people would think the show's over.
Oh, they did. People walked out. People walked out during that section. Some people walked out because they thought the show was over. Some people walked out because it just wasn't what they had signed up for. They thought it might have been, an Instagrammable, maybe like Sweet Tooth Hotel, something a little bit more fun. So you've got this cube asking them to like question, what does it mean to be a human, and why do we crave human connection? And then they're, forced to sit in darkness for 3 minutes. Yeah, the I didn't realize. So those ideas of quarantine and isolation were, built into the text from the very beginning. But the idea of an isolation chamber wasn't something that we had consciously thought of until you had brought it up. But once you brought it up, and we ran with it and told everyone it was on purpose.
Shelby, I've enjoyed your work, but I have to say that I'm not. I don't see you having to transition much into isolation.
Yeah, I would say the envelopes really weren't like a response, or any of this work was necessarily a response to what was happening. I think maybe because a lot of my work in the last few years has kind of been trying to grasp with like ideas of objects or things that are too hard to grasp or too big, something called like a hyper object, which is coined by a guy named Timothy Morton. Something like an earlier work that I was doing like in grad school was centered around the idea of like a black hole, a super massive object in outer space that I couldn't necessarily wrap my head around, and making and kind of basically I reference it by making holes in a wall or ceiling that are basically the event horizon of the planet. So if you were to make the Earth, the density of a black hole would be about 18 millimeters across, like diameter wise. So I think for me, with this whole pandemic and the fact that it's kind of a global phenomenon, things are happening at a scale that are very hard to grasp. I think for me, that kind of jump wasn't too big to make. So I think it's just some similar things kind of happen. I think that's just kind of the nature of the work too.
It always struck me that your art could be seen as having an environmental theme because of so much about discarded things, but precisely because they're discarded, they often seem to me kind of lonely,
right,
isolated. And there's a certain amount of humor in some of your work, as with false security, with a security envelope that's been torn open. There's a certain wry humor, but still there is a sense of the humans that aren't there.
Yeah, I think a lot of it is once you start to look at just kind of like one thing or isolate it, and I think one of my favorite quotes, I'll step back, one of my favorite quotes is, in and of itself, nothing ever matters, but what really matters is nothing is ever in and of itself. Which is the idea is like, you can isolate something and it might start to mean nothing, but you start to realize everything's kind of connected. And the more you expand that, the more you start to realize everything's kind of tied together. So I think, with things that have been happening this last year, we're starting to realize everything's tied together through strings, and you pull one string, it pulls something else. I think.
Have you done work that is expressly about the pandemic, or is it just simply continuing in your practice?
No, yeah,
As the
it's not.
overlay of
Yeah, it's also that, and I also, and sometimes I feel like it's not like a cop out, but sometimes I'm trying to make work that isn't specifically about one thing. Sometimes it's about kind of realizing art is like a place to kind of come to and think about something, and then kind of and see where you go with that. So sometimes I'm not trying to make something specifically about one thing, but something that kind of have different ideas attached to it, kind of at the time or place you approach it.
I mean, I realize that sculpture often is about a single isolated object that we
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
So
and I
itself
sorry,
to
I'm gonna
that.
interrupt.
That's all right. I was about to say it
Yeah.
lends itself to that.
Yeah, and I think that's, for me, a big part of it is I really am interested in sculpture and the way sculpture functions as an artwork. It's been like I've kind of pushed away imagery. I think for me, it's kind of like a resistance to the kind of screen culture we live in, and kind of how everything's, so especially with this last year, everything being on screens, I still was kind of craving like physical, just the world, I like to walk around my art, kind of do a 360, or kind of like have like an inner, you can kind of dance with it, is a little bit the way I think of it sometimes. Is having an object in front of you is a lot different than looking at a picture or watching a performance or something.
Have you ever visited a gallery or the Nasher Sculpture Center to see people's responses, to see the interaction?
I popped in a few weekends, and I mean, that's one of my favorite things when I do openings. So I think this is the first show I've done since everything's happened, and not having like an opening or kind of like a place to like see people interact with the work is strange. Because for me, a little bit of my enjoyment is seeing how many people take the time to actually recognize what it's made out of or what it is. How many people are too busy to walk right past it, or kind of don't give it the time that I think, just the few seconds that maybe you might notice something that it's not.
Joy, you created a work called Life Interrupted for Bruce Wood Dance last fall, and the story behind it, the story that inspired it, is interesting. I was wondering if you could talk about that, about what led to Life Interrupted.
Sure. Last fall, we were looking at doing a series of outdoor performances and then creating virtual content. We knew a lot of our audience members couldn't go anywhere, feel safe outside their homes. And so this was new for us, that we moved into dance film and looked at how we could reach people that way. And some lovely patrons and friends of the company had this was terrifying and shocking. And the husband really had almost an out-of-body experience, feeling like he was battling darkness. And then really on the edge of that darkness and kind of falling into this state of surrender, he felt that even though there was this incredible distance from his wife and his family and their friends, he felt that as his body began to recover in the very last days of him battling it, he felt surrounded by this wholeness of people who come to find out overseas were sending thoughts and prayers for him. His family and friends here in this country were sending thoughts and prayers. So we have this beautiful piece of music created by composer Joseph Falcon. We have the story of this couple, and I choreographed a work that kind of covered their journey and experience from this happy abandoned bliss that they were on this lovely trip into complete earth-shattering separation, isolation, fear, darkness, and then kind of coming out of that as a changed person to kind of a new sense of wholeness. And despite the separation, having a really strong feeling of community and connectivity with people that were miles and miles away and never even got to speak to him or see him, but knowing that they were there, and that was something that strengthened him back to wholeness. So it was a really extraordinary story. And we were able to create a short film with our videographers, the DGBs, and share that last November with our audiences.
Let's see an excerpt from Life Interrupted, choreographed by Joy Bollinger. Now, Joy, with Ruben's piece, he created a work that everything was very small scale and isolated throughout for the performers, the artists, the audience. But you created, in essence, a film, a short film. I could see the performers were wearing masks, but how was that managed, all of that we saw? Was all that done in pieces?
Yes, some of it was done in pieces. When we felt comfortable when we had solo moments, when we were in a group setting, especially indoors, we used masks. That worked best for this piece because it was about COVID. We had other works on our program that were not about this. And so we filmed those outdoors with as much separation and short periods of contact as possible so that we could be free from the masks. But yes, our studio protocols during this time have been very extreme, and filming, luckily you can get intimacy from a camera that we couldn't achieve in our physicality, in our physical, separation and existence in the space, but the camera could help us with that. So dance film became essential for us sharing our stories in the way we wanted to during this time.
You said earlier about missing that interaction with dancers and being in the space. Did this satisfy some of that, although there was different constraints? Did this satisfy that impulse?
It did. I think as we tiptoed back into the studio last fall, along with the kind of nervous sense of how we're going to do this and what's going to actually work, there was just a joy and excitement to just be in the space, even if it was only a few people at a time, even if we were standing 10 feet apart with mask on, no contact, you know, it was okay, we're here, we get to just see each other across the room. And even though we're further apart than normal, we can feel what the other person is doing physically. And we started realizing what we could do with those boundaries in place and finding ways to challenge ourselves to think about what we could offer our audience with those boundaries in place.
Ruben earlier talked about ending on a note of joy. Was that one of the things that attracted you about this? Is it wasn't just a complete bummer, everyone winds up isolated and lost, that there was a recovery?
Yeah, that was a really beautiful part to this story. I think Mark Dietz specifically had a very almost out-of-body spiritual experience. And he said, I came out of this experience a new person. I am different. I'm forever changed by this. And I want to share the happiness and the joy. I want to share hope. I want to share this sense of community, and that there is something to hold on to here. And it was just a beautiful story, especially because they came out of it not back to the usual, but in a new and different place that was filled with those feelings, even after such a, difficult journey.
Viewers on YouTube, just a reminder that if you wish to comment or ask questions, you can do so in the comment section directly underneath the video. I wanted to ask you, Ruben, the same question I just asked Joy. Was the experience of doing the cube satisfy your theater urge? Was that enough? Is that something that you want to replicate under those circumstances in the future? Is this going ahead enough for you?
It definitely satisfied some of that need. Getting to interact with audiences and being in the same space with other performers. The kind of in some ways it was completely different because the performers, we couldn't after a show we couldn't go out for drinks or something. Like we didn't interact. I didn't really get to know them all that well. Do you know what I mean? But I think one of the things I really crave about theater and about live performance is the fact that it's live, and that if there's a certain anxiety or stress to something going wrong, and with a show like this, lots of things went wrong. Jerome, the day that you came to interview us, the entire cube just broke, just fell apart, just obliterated into a million pieces.
That didn't happen again, did it? That didn't happen.
No, never happened again. We fixed it and made sure that it would never that was a one-time thing. But our set designer Jeffrey, who also helped to conceive of the show, ran off to Home Depot and had to rebuild the frame. And luckily we had it back up in 2 or 3 minutes. But there was a number of times during the show where a projector would go out or the power went out one day in the middle of a performance, and that kind of stuff just kind of fuels me when I'm in performance. Getting to see how the audience would interact differently. There is a level of interaction in the show where the audience is being asked to say things. And I, as a performer and as an audience member, I hate audience interaction. But I don't know. It's something that made its way into the show, and getting to that aspect of it, getting to see how different audiences would respond to it. That again also kind of fueled me and made each performance feel different. So it definitely satisfied some of it. Will I do it again? I don't know. This show seems so specific to the moment that even if we were to do it, some people after the second run, because both runs were sold out, some people wanted us to bring it back a third time, because the tickets were so limited. And I thought, even if we were to do this in May, I already feel like some of the things in the show are no longer really as relevant. There's some live performances going on already. So I think that reveal halfway through the show of live performers, it wouldn't be as impactful even now.
We have a viewer with an interesting question. Michael Buss asks, what would your practice look like had COVID not upended our lives? Has this sparked a new focus area and path forward? Or will you likely revert back to your past themes, media, practices? That's for all three of you. Ruben, I was just asking you that question.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I would say a part of me, I'm boring. I love traditional theater. Do you know what I mean? Like, I love a clear distinction between the audience and the performers. I like intimate spaces, yes. But I like living room dramas, you know, just like people being human beings in living room. Like that's my thing. I was kind of like raised on linear narratives. I'm boring, you know, and I had a bunch of those kinds of projects lined up before the pandemic. They all disappeared. A part of me wants to go back to those because that's what I love. That I love dialogue. But this was the first time that I ever, you know, there's a moment in the show where I monologue to the audience and like my face is like projected onto the back wall. And there's like a live feed and I'm speaking to the audience very frankly about my experiences over, you know, the past year. I've never done anything like that. I've never spoken my words on a stage before. I've never written something that was specifically about me. There was something, I don't know. I hate to say that we use the word therapeutic, but it was moving in a way that other projects had never been. It was challenging in a way that other projects had never been. Some of that might make its way into some of my work moving forward, but I'm also kind of like looking forward to going back to the way things were. And I don't know if that makes me a terrible person. You know, I know we're supposed to all learn something from the past year, but I really miss what I used to do.
Joy, when those videos were first presented, I was talking to Gail Halperin, producer of Bruce Wood Dance, and she said that going forward, your company would include videos as much as they could. She thought of like one every live performance. There'd be something like that. So what did you learn from this, and is it going to change Bruce Wood Dance going forward?
Yeah, it will change. We learned how to create dance films, and that hadn't been necessary before, and we didn't understand that even though that was challenging and different, that there was a benefit there. And we've had enough virtual events at this point that we realized we're getting questions from overseas. We're reaching people that couldn't travel to our exact location to be present for a show in a theater or a studio. And we realize that that's something that we can share much more broadly, and we need to continue keeping that opening there for people that are interested in what we're doing. And now we know how to do it. And so we're happy that it pushed us to do that. I don't think we would have necessarily seen the need for that. On occasion, you stream something or share some clips live, but we wouldn't have crafted something specifically for an audience to view in that manner had we not had this experience. We've had a few other things happen this year that would have never happened with our regular schedule. Our dancers got to choreograph on the company and on each other, those that are interested in choreography. We've just had some unique things specific to this time and this freedom with the lack of consistent performances popping up that we were able to do and to experiment with and to explore. And there's been some real benefits to that and some real learning. And so going forward, we're going to continue with the best of both worlds. We want live, we want in person, we want proximity, we want bodies in space together, but we also have to find ways to share what we do with people that cannot be there and are interested and are eager to experience something. People that just don't have the health to come to a theater, period, minus the pandemic. People that are far away and can't make it to the exact location we're performing. We have to have an offering for them. Lots of times you want to take things in schools, you know, and share with our education partnerships. We have to have ways to continue sharing dance in rooms that you can't dance in spaces that you can't dance in. So we've learned from that, and we're going to move forward with that.
And Shelby, has any of your experience provided new material, a new path, new ideas?
No, I don't know how much has really changed that much. I think almost for me, it's almost been a little harder because I think how much I realized a lot of stuff that I kind of think about or comes from like just people watching or personal interactions. So I think that's one thing I realized I took for granted so much, is just being in a public space with people and watching people go about their lives and do their thing. And it's kind of, it was a little jarring. I thought it'd be really nice at first and have this isolation, but you start to realize, like, even being alone in a crowd has a special feeling, that I'm kind of missing out on, I think.
To that end, your work at the Nasher Sculpture Center is on view for the public. People walking past can see it.
Yeah, and so that was up. Right now, that's a friend of mine has another show up at the Nasher right now that just opened last weekend. So I just want to make sure people, there's images and stuff, but I took it down about 2 weeks ago on the 29th, I think. But yeah, I think so. It was kind of, it almost felt too normal when I had that show and put work up, and then I could know, and people would text me or let me know that they went to go see. It wasn't too normal. I guess it was nice. It just felt weird to almost be doing something. It felt foreign but familiar at the same time. So it's like, oh, I've done this a million times or however many times, and it still feels different, but it's still the same thing.
We have another viewer questions. What changes for you when approaching creating art without an in-person connection, either with your fellow performers or without an audience? How do you specifically think about the purpose of your art in a post-pandemic world? It's kind of hard to think of when all this goes away. What has changed for your art? Joy, you've talked a little bit about that, because now you have this virtual access, you have this internet audience. But has it changed what you think about the purpose of your art in live situation, in person?
Yeah, I think the dancers, the company, everyone is still kind of processing this last year. And I think there's going to continue to be work and probably an abundance of creativity from all that time of like thought and solitude. Sometimes I feel like we're so busy that we're just jumping from project to project. And I specifically am beginning a new piece that will premiere at our June show. And it is about the effect the pandemic had on mental health, specific to the experience our dancers had. And that work it wouldn't exist without this experience, and I imagine that lots of people will continue. Art is an expression of life. And so as we all continue to process and feel, okay, what just happened? What was that year of my life? And little parts of it, and little beautiful moments. Some of our dancers said there was a calm and a slowing down that was so special. And I realized I need that in my life more. And other people hated the isolation and, craved everything but that slowness. And just looking at that and talking about it and seeing the effect it had on those who were already struggle with mental health and what they needed, and where human connection plays a part in our lives, and really taking a look at that again and creating something out of that. So I imagine we'll continue to see works that tell little slices of the story that everybody had this big pie of experiences this last year, and parts of that will be shared through art.
All three of you have talked about this to a degree. I think many people might think that it's something that only artists feel, the need for an audience, the need for that human connection. But I know as a cultural journalist, for me, it's been a disembodied experience that only becomes emphasized with, now that I've been vaccinated and I had friends who were vaccinated, we visited them recently just for drinks and talk. And it was so amazing, the normality and the rush of just being in a room with other people, just sitting around and chatting, let alone the idea of, structured movement, structured speeches, drama, anything like that, anything to look at. We were just sitting around catching up. And that alone was so human and so real that it amazed me that I hadn't done anything like it in 14 months, really.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting, Jerome. So, the idea of like going to a public space and seeing people interacting with one another. Yeah, it's a thing that I haven't experienced outside of like, going to a restaurant to get takeout, but Nigel Newton, who was the composer and musician for the show, he's vaccinated, I'm vaccinated. And he just like, this is the first time it's happened in over a year, emailed me yesterday, said he had an idea for a project and we're going to meet up at like a coffee shop outdoors. And the idea of like, that seems so foreign to me, to be able to be at a point where we could potentially start doing that again is exciting and scary also. Yeah.
We have a question from Amy and Hosa, who asks, ironically enough, I suppose, is there anything you will miss about this time when things are more normal? Is there something that you'd like to treasure? Like, gosh, I'm going to miss that. Anyone?
I said to a person yesterday that I felt like we were a huge locomotive train that had come to a halt, and now it's trying to get back up to like 100 miles an hour again, and it feels a little bit feels like a lot maybe right now, just because we had come to such a halt. And I said, wow, a little part of me is like, I miss COVID. I just miss that time with my kids, my family, and kind of that where there was, you just weren't being pulled so many different directions. And a little part of me misses that and understands that there's a value there, and there's, you have to find a good balance even when things start charging forward again, like we like them to.
I know one thing that I will miss, that with virtual office meetings, I can say, oh, I have to go take care of the cat at the door and then leave for 10 minutes. And you can't do that in the office. Shelby, anything that you will?
I mean, the other thing, maybe it's not something that I'll miss, but something that has happened with museums reopening are like scheduled visiting times. And to be honest, I don't think I'd have a problem with that continuing. I think within the last few years, as museums have gotten really popular and Instagram and social media stuff, it's almost like going to the zoo, like while at the art museum sometimes. So it's just kind of like I don't think I'd have a problem with kind of crowd control at more museums, kind of just maintaining a smaller audience all the time. I just think for the experience alone of seeing artwork, it's really easy to be distracted by a picture all the time.
So you kind of like the isolation in a gallery.
Yeah, I think a little bit, maybe just a little bit. I just over 2 years, not that it's a bad thing that people are going to museums, it's great and all, but at the same time, it really can detract from the experience sometimes. So I'll be honest and say, maybe a little bit of that crowd control isn't such a bad thing.
Yeah. Certainly, I know crowd control is an issue when you go to a big popular show and it's in 20 feet of the work. That's an issue.
Yeah, absolutely.
On the other hand,
so maybe I mean, and also that's the thing. A lot of those big blockbuster shows have been happening a lot more and more too. So I think maybe those won't happen as much. We'll see. It's kind of to be told.
Have any of you been able to gauge public response to what you've done? I mean, I realize there's probably some sense of, thank God we were able to go see something. But beyond that, is there a sense of, oh, this is a lifeline, or is this, we'll settle for this?
I mean, it is weird getting just a lot of, like, with the show at the Nasher I had recently, just most of my responses were all through social media, which is fine, and I appreciate, as much love as I can get, but at the same time, it's not the same as having a conversation with someone face to face, with the work or things like that. But
the reason I was asking is that you often hear about how everyone has transitioned to seeing everything on streaming, on Netflix, Amazon Prime, and everything. And having done that myself, it's not a substitute. But are we willing to settle for these little bits that we're getting from him? Or, as your audience said, more?
Yeah, I think for the Cube, this one project that I did, it was live, and because I'm not part of like any kind of like institution, like I was marketing and selling the tickets. I was doing all of that by myself, producing it, raising the money. And so, I could see I was the person that people would interact with whenever they had like questions about the ticket buying process, or if they enjoyed the show. I'm the one running all of the social media. And so it seemed like people were responding well to it, and they were surprised by the piece, and some people were moved by it. I don't know about it being a lifeline. I don't know how is replicable a word, how easily it can be replicated by others. Because again, the piece is so kind of specific to the moment, and it was 3 people in a plastic cube. I think what some people might have gotten out of it, what other artists might have gotten out of it, is this idea that there is a way to create live performance that kind of like breaks kind of like traditional, preconceived notions of what live performance can be.
I think you'd be grateful when you're not answering all the ticket questions and trying to handle all of that.
Yes, absolutely.
There is something to be said for institutional
Yeah, 100%.
staff.
Yeah.
Joy, the audience response to what Bruce Wood's been doing?
I think our audience was grateful that we found ways to offer them something during that time. I think we have our last virtual events, we put a poll at the end of the event talking about, would you come to a live performance at Moody Performance Hall this June? And the numbers were exceeding, yes, we want to be back there live. We want to see you guys live. We'll have, with safety precautions in place, are you comfortable doing this? And it was overwhelmingly yes. And so I think even though they were thankful and they were happy to have some sort of engagement, and it was important for us as an organization to show them that we were still working in creating content during this strange time, I think we absolutely do need to get back to having that interaction with them in person. I think something Shelby said, it's just not the same when you get that feedback virtually. A couple of our male dancers performed a duet as a guest company at Annette Strauss Square a few weeks ago. And one of the dancers said, bowing and hearing applause right there as I bowed in that space was just like, just almost exhilarating, almost the surprise of experiencing that feeling again. And it's hard to, gratitude in words and on an email is wonderful, but having those bodies in front of you and feeling the energy coming across a space when you have a live performance, or I guess a conversation after a show that you guys probably have, it's hard to compare to that. It's hard to compare. And so that's what we're craving. And that's what we think our audience is craving as well.
Here's an interesting question, it kind of a reversal on things. Was there something surprising you learned about yourself and your art that you might not have learned otherwise? All of a sudden thrown in all this disruption, thrown in isolation, staying at home with family or not. Is there something that you learned about yourself and possibly about your art? Other than, boy, I need this.
Yeah, I think I personally learned how for a long time, I've always viewed my job as like an actor and a director and a writer. My job is to like remove, and I don't know where I got this from, but my job is to remove as much of myself from the process as possible. Like, I don't want to impose anything on the text. I just need to be like this like clear vessel that kind of like character and emotion flows through. And it is my job to find the truth in the text, in the play, right? This piece was not all about me, but it was about me and the performers and our personal experiences. And I guess I learned how valuable that is and how powerful that can be, but also how scary it is, and how I actively have been running away from that in a lot of my work forever. And how, I guess I'm starting to question how I can kind of like tap into that a little bit more without it becoming, navel-gazing and self-indulgent, but how I can give myself permission to allow myself to show up a little bit more in my work.
Well, the cube was deeply personal. Even as it seemed disorienting at the beginning, it clearly, I mean, you put yourself out there. Are you saying that you're going to try and do something like that again, where you really pour yourself into a piece?
I don't know. Maybe. I mean, I will say, like, I'm not a solo performer. Like, I'd never like said my words before on a stage. This is the first time I'd done that. I don't particularly like solo performance. It makes me uncomfortable, both as an audience member and as a performer. I don't know that I'll be doing that explicitly. But you know, I was commissioned by Kitchen Dog to write a play right now, and I'm writing, and there's a lot of myself that shows up in the play right now as I'm writing it. And normally I would, as I'm doing rewrites, I would go back and I would cut as much of that out as possible, because I never wanted the play to be about me. And again, I don't know where I got this idea, but I never wanted the work to be about me. And I'm giving myself permission to see what happens, I don't know, what might present itself if I do allow some of myself to show up in the work a little bit more.
Joy, is there anything that you learned that you wouldn't have experienced otherwise about yourself or your art?
Yeah, I think maybe for me it was just about our company. We prioritized the dancers during this time, making sure that the weeks of their contract we fulfilled their wages and salary. We didn't just furlough them. And we asked them, we drew upon them for creativity coming back and ideas, and kind of opened it up. How are we going to do this? And so it was a real period of resiliency and grit. And we know if we just pause, you can only press pause for so long before something kind of diminishes and stops, and we refuse to do that. And so I think a challenge that created creativity in just different avenues. And, you know, we talk to dancers about adaptability with their physicality and their range and all the styles and all the aesthetics they can embody. But this was like real adaptability in terms of mental and emotional drive and resilience. And with all these obstacles that are kind of specific to our art form, how can we figure it out? And do we love it and care about it enough and find it to be important enough to sit there and say, we're going to figure it out one way or another? And so it was a test. And I think a test to see what you could make, what you could do with this thing you were handed that seemed an impossibility, you know, in some ways. And so it really showed a lot of character and stamina on behalf of the staff and the board of the company and the director, you know, and Gail Halprin and everybody, to say, no, we're not going to just kind of let this dissipate or just let the dancers go off and do whatever they need to do. We're going to figure it out and get moving in a direction forward, even though it might not look like anything we've done before. And I think that was a real kind of show of character for an organization.
I like the expression of hitting pause for too long. When speaking with artists and arts managers the past year, I would continually hear, the hardest thing isn't the isolation. The hardest thing is not knowing when this is going to end. It's the doubt going forward, not knowing. Well, we can't make plans. We can't decide, oh, we're going to go do this for the future, because there is no future. We don't know what's going to happen. And that was clearly, I mean, for the arts administrators, where planning is everything, that is their job. It was driving them up a wall. Just being able to focus on something and know that that was going to happen and they could do that was a tremendous relief. So yeah, eventually the pause becomes stop. Shelby, anything that you learned that you wouldn't have learned otherwise?
I think for me, I realized the benefits of like a good routine. I think having that opportunity, kind of like setting that up and actually having the opportunity to do that, because I work so many freelance jobs, a lot of it just kind of like getting work in when you can. I think having the opportunity to kind of like have a routine or something that I kind of things that I try to do every day in a certain order kind of helped me. It's something that I haven't been able to do that as often. So I'll say that was a nice little perk a little bit. But
Well,
we'll see if that
yes,
continues or not.
sorry.
No, it's okay.
Our time is up. I'd like to thank our three panelists, Joy Bollinger of Bruce Wood Dance, Shelby David Meier, the visual artist, Ruben Carrazana, theater artist. I'd also like to thank our co-sponsors, the Dallas Museum of Art, Stacy Lizotte. We're going to have two other State of the Arts coming up, all of them dealing with aspects of the pandemic. We're going to be at the next one is going to be at Fort Worth at the Kimball Art Museum on May 7th. And then the Greater Denton Arts Council will be hosting us on June 17th. They're all virtual, they're all free, so you can come back and see us then. Again, thank you very much, panel. I enjoyed it.
Thank you.